Hello, Lizzie here. Today we're going to be making our spice storage pods. So you can see two behind me. You've got a little one here and you've got a really nice big one there. I'll get one down in a second. We're going to make the medium sized one, so we've got a set of three, and I've called them spice because it goes with the theme of the month, which is autumnal, but also it's a bit like having all your spice pots out in a row on your rack in your kitchen, and that's of course what these storage pods will do for you. You can stack them inside each other if you want to, but also alongside each other, obviously, to store all your perhaps sewing essentials, but why not make one for the kitchen? We're also going to be using the new autumn leaf template. It's the design that we use to make Sage, which is the big quilt behind me, and also the fabulous cushion here, which is what we did in the video, all finished. It looks stunning. I really love it. I love the colours. So we're going to be using autumn leaf again, and autumn leaf is our acrylic template. Now, obviously, not everybody will have that, so there is a paper version in the pattern, so you can obviously enjoy the benefits of using the autumn leaf template. The great thing is about the template is that it's a 3-in-1. You've got the square here, the 2.5-inch square here. You've also got the 2.5-inch half square triangle, but you've also got this fabulous shape, which we call the leaf shape in the patterns, because that's the easiest way to explain it. You've got all the 1/4-inch seam lines marked out, and you've also got little holes there where you can pop your pen through and mark where your seam allowances are. So it actually makes it super easy. So if you don't want that, and I perfectly understand if you don't want it, the template for that, obviously, like I say, comes in the pattern, so all is fine. Where if you do buy the template, it comes to you taped to one of my postcards. Actually, I've decided to put it on the front there with the tape going across, with slight change in design as we go along, and that comes to you like that with instructions. You've got a video tutorial as well on how to use it, and also a free pattern that goes alongside the template too. This tape that I used to tape the template down with, that's a grip strip, so if you peel that carefully off of your postcard and tear it in half, easy to tear, put a piece front and back. I did have a sample handy, I could have shown you, but I've put it away, I've been tidy. You can put it front and back, and it stops your template from being so slippy, because this is 3mm beautifully cut UK made template in acrylic, and it's very shiny and very slippy. So it's a good idea to put the grip strip back and front to hold it in place on your fabric. So using that design, using that template, let me get those bits and bobs out the way. The main part that you need cut is literally that. So for every storage pod you create, this is all you're cutting. Now, because of how I wanted it to be, I could have done it a different way, then I use the template upside down, or you can put it on the wrong side of your fabric and you can put the template right side up. Okay, it's up to you. I'm sorry if it's flashing, but in this instance, if you want to cut with your fabric right side up, then you're going to flip the template over so it's the wrong side of your template is facing you. It matters not, you don't need to read anything, all you're going to do is cut around. And because it's a fabulously thick template, you can cut 3 or 4 layers easily of fabric holding that in place. And like I say, if you use the grip strip, it just makes cutting accurate and quick. Like I say, the paper template is in the pattern, so you're not to worry. You can still do the same. You can use some adhesive to hold the template down on your fabric, or you can pin through the layers. I'll leave that for you to decide, but you get the choice. It's not like you have to buy this. You certainly do not. So I've made quite a bit of the medium size storage pod already. Look at, isn't that just gorgeous? So I've got 8 different colours of autumnal fabrics here. You can please yourself. You can have Christmas fabrics, Easter fabrics, baby fabric. Actually, baby fabrics would look gorgeous making this into a pod. You can put all your baby powders and creams and lotions and potions. Talking of which, you could do it for yourself. You could have your best favourite fabric. Maybe you love a bit of Liberty, maybe it's William Morris, whatever it is, or Annette Anderson, whatever. Sorry, Lynette Anderson. Then the world's your oyster. But this theme is autumnal, so we've got 8 autumnal colours here. And I do bring in a gorgeous sort of... what would you call it? It's a real regal purple, really, isn't it? A burgundy purpley colour. There must be a name for it. And that's going to be the base of the box. And I've got some beautiful batik there, look, for the inside of the storage pod. So that's where I've got to so far. I'm going to bring the pod down in a sec so I can show you how it looks. So all I've got to do is 2 more of the strips, and it couldn't be easier. You're literally going to line 2 up, and I would look at your design. For instance, this end has this, let me just move that up so we can see. This end has this pinky colour and the this beautiful yellow. So I don't really want that yellow on this end, so I'd probably put those 2 on that end. Let's have a look at the other end. I've got that yellow there again. Well, that was good choice, wasn't it? So what I'll have to do, this always happens, is to put the yellow perhaps down there and put the green on the top, to make that a little bit slightly different. So just think about your design, because obviously it may be really important to you that you don't have 2 colours sitting together. I think, you know, sometimes you could lose a lot of sleep worrying about that. So that is so far. Let me get the little pod down. Let me reach and get that. So I've used that same batik fabric on the lining, which is gorgeous. And if we turn it over, you'll see that the lining comes from the back over to the front. We put a little bit of wadding along there, so it feels like it's padded. That was quite important to me, that the top was almost the same feeling as the actual body. And I've also done some quilting on the sort of the top part of the V. You can see that quite clearly how that looks. In the big one, I did it on the bottom. So, you know, you've got so many choices. You could also have a look on your machine and see if you've got a beautiful embroidery leaf design, perhaps, and follow the lines using a beautiful embroidery stitch. I'll leave that up to you to decide what to do, but I certainly just wanted a lovely, plain, simple piece of stitching. I've got a stitch length of about 3.5 on this, so it stands out, and I'm using a beautiful gold yellow Gutermann thread I've got lots of bits on here just to highlight the design, really. That's all I needed to do, and we'll do that today. So that's the little one. You can see that's that purple, isn't it glorious? You can choose your own, obviously, your fabrics, and you can have it all the same colour if you want. So I'm just going to show you how to put the strips together. It's dead easy. Let's just make sure the machine is on. So you're literally going to do right side to right side, and you flip it so that you've almost got, you know, when you make your binding and you have that beautiful 45 degree or 90 degree, whichever way you want to look at it, then that's what you're creating. So if I try to hold that up still, that's what you're creating. And you're going to be stitching from across the diagonal there. So be careful that you don't stretch, because obviously it's on the bias. And you want to try and keep to a scant 1/4 inch, which is quite important, because it means that everything is going to fit the design. And you will end up with a 6.5 inch piece of fabric. So these 2 pieces, once stitched together, is 6.5 inches, which is actually quite convenient for other designs that I've done. So again, this is the other 2 pair, or 1 pair I should say. And again, we do right sides together. And obviously you're going to pin this if you want to, and that's the sort of shape you're after. And you're going from the top across the diagonal, keeping to that scant 1/4 inch. And obviously you can chain stitch these. You don't have to do one at a time like I'm doing. I'm just doing it this way so I can show you what it looks like. I mean, it's just gorgeous, isn't it? You also want to make sure that all of your pieces are you're pressing all the same way, so they're all pressing being pressed upwards, and this is the side, this upward here, this is where we're going to quilt. Now you don't have to try and quilt to hold that seam down, gosh, that would be too complicated, but you're going to go fairly close to that, but it does mean that all of the bulk is sitting all on one side. You know, it just makes it easier. So when we start to look at the ones we've just made, I'll keep it there for you to see. I'm going to try and remember that I want to do the opposite side, and let me do it so we're right way around. Do you know I've got yellow on both ends? I thought I had, hadn't I? We talked about it. So I want to make sure that my green is at the top, like that. Of all the colours, hey, doesn't matter. So I need to press it so it's going up. So obviously you can finger press it just to hold it in place, but I'll do it at this angle here so you can see. Obviously you want to do it flat on your desk and not at a precarious angle like me. And be careful if you're using plain fabrics if you're pressing, because you might end up with, you know, like lines here, silver lines I always call them, when you're ironing. So just be careful that you don't overdo it. And then with this one, it doesn't matter which way I do it, because it's not important whether that's the top or whether that's the bottom, that I can remember anyway, having looked at it earlier. So I'll just put that on my mat. So give it a nice press. Let's get it like that. And doesn't that look gorgeous? Lovely and clean. So all we need to do is, when we attach these to our strip, we want to make sure that that seam, they're all going the right way. So if we were to look at this one, this is the last one that we did, then all I'm going to do is right sides together, checking to make sure that my seams are going upwards, and they are. Okay, I could do with a bit of an iron again, but there we are. And again, we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And like I say, if you get into the swing of this, you could just chain piece even these little bits. You could do pairs, and then you could do pairs into 4s, and so forth, to create. That looks lovely, doesn't it? Aren't they gorgeous colours? And I got the green here as well. So we might as well just put that one put that one on the end as well. So again, right sides together. Although, do you want to be happy, because that's his football colours, his football team colours, yellow and green. Oh dear. So again, line everything up. If your seams aren't sitting straight, then just pull them in a little bit so they all sit nicely. And there we are. So all of our seams are going upwards. You can see how that looks. So I'm going to go and press this. So I'm just going to get my mat in. We'll go on the overhead so we can just have a quick look. Now I will do this from the wrong side because of I don't want the shine. Now it doesn't matter so much, unless you're using certain fabrics and colours, it doesn't matter which way you press, whether it's that way or whether it's that way, because you've still got a seam whichever way you do it being folded over. But what I want you to do is just to try and make sure that you're slightly pulling on that, so the seam is opened up, and just go all the way along. And then I want you to go to the front of it just to make sure that you're happy that you haven't got any creases. It's so easy to do that, but the initial bit of pressing, ironing here, dry iron, you can use some best press if you want to. It's following the lines. It's difficult to do when you've got all these seams. You can see that they want to twist the other way, and just follow it through. Like I say, just slightly pull on it, just pull that away, put it from the top. Far more easy than where those seams are. You can see, probably better if I did it the other way. It's funny how when you're working in your own space and you're with your own thoughts and you're nice and quiet in your head, nothing seems complicated or an issue. When you start talking and showing other folk, it all changes. I've noticed that over the years. Anyway, there we are. So have a look at the front now. I'm okay with all those colours close. Actually, that's a different colour to that, so that's not so bad. Very subtle. So just be careful with the front. Like I said, I don't want you to put shiny lines on it, so just give it a little flick, but also you want to make sure that you haven't got any folds or creases in your seams. That's great. That looks really lovely. So the next thing to do is to pop our wadding on. So we're going to just spray it. Now you could, if you wanted to, use something like H640, which is self-adhesive, if you like. You're going to iron it on, and obviously you're going to do it from the front. So again, because you're going to be using your iron quite a bit, because I'm using plain fabrics, it's very obvious. If you don't use plain fabrics, it's not so bad, but I would put a protective muslin over the top. So if your H640 is here, put a muslin over the top, a nice soft cotton, Egyptian cotton that we use quite a lot, just to protect your fabric so you don't get a shine on it. But with this wadding, we're just going to spray and just a tiny bit of adhesive. That we're going to do a little bit of quilting to hold all these together, and you're just going to lay it down. And for once I'm going edge to edge. Sometimes I'll cut that back 1/4 inch. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I'm quite fickle like that. But with this is a very, very soft 80/20. In fact, no, it's a bamboo. This is a bamboo. Yeah. Oh yes, I've just remembered it's a bamboo. Yeah, this was the leftover wadding from when I had my sage long arm quilted, and she always sends me the extra bits, which is lovely. And yeah, so I'm just using that. Let's just line that up, and if you've got any overhang, well, just cut it off. Okay, so now we have our piece. Our piece there. Doesn't that look lovely? It's already pieced up, but we want to make it into a tube, so we're just going to do right sides together and join them together. 1/4 inch seam allowance could be consistent all the way through. Even if you did a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but that's up to you, 3/8 of an inch, whatever. Just be consistent with that. So I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that, just to join them up. Do a little back stitch there. There we go. So that has created a tube. So don't forget where your seams are. You might want to be guided by how it looks. So the seam in this case, I'm having facing up, which perhaps goes against the grain for some people, but that's just the way I rock and roll. And I'm going to quilt this top edge here. So there we are. So that's joined all the pieces on there. I've given it a little iron. Looks absolutely glorious. Like I say, try to remember which side you press that middle seam up to, this seam here. Just try to remember. Maybe it's one where when you quilt it, you want it to quilt away from the seam or on top of the seam. I mean, you could consider maybe if your machine will go through all the layers. I know my machine will, but you may want to consider that when you are quilting. So now that we've created our long piece, that is the size for the medium size spice. I'm going to quilt it. Now, simple, I'm going to use the edge of my presser foot as my guide. The only problem you'll get is when you come to the points and how far you go down from that. You'll see as I do this. So you must carry on past the seam to create a nice V, and a lot of that is down to your eye, getting your eye in. But you could obviously mark it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, that way it's going to be such an easy project to quilt. So I've changed my thread to a gorgeous yellow thread. It's sort of yellow that you would get on denim jeans, and I've increased my stitch length to 3.5. You could go even up as 4 if you wanted to. So I'm just going to follow the lines of the, let me just move that in slightly, the lines of the seam. So it's just a case of keeping your eye on that, and also think about how far beyond that seam you want to go. Like I say, it's something that you will kind of work out yourself, and you might need to sometimes just do one more stitch to make it perfect. It's always one more stitch. It's always short, very rarely long. And I think that could do with another. Yep. Sometimes your stitch length works out to be absolutely perfect. Sometimes it doesn't. So you can sort of kind of count your stitches beyond the seam line. So just carry on along the whole length. Now obviously you could do a double row of stitching. You could use your creative embroidery stitches on your machine. Oh my gosh, there are so many things that you could do on the side of these storage tubs. It even lends itself maybe to some applique. Maybe you've got some autumnal leaf applique pieces that you want to use up. So applique, you know, you could put the actual names of something on here. For instance, if this was for your kitchen, you could put spices, the word spice. You could use it for bread rolls on a picnic, the barbecue. Gosh, there's so many things. Because they're such good sizes, and you've got the choices of what size you make. If you don't have to make all three, then the world's your oyster, really. You could certainly have one in your sewing room with all your threads in. Maybe all your embroidery threads will go in there, your machine embroidery threads, that's what I'm thinking, rather than your hand embroidery. You could store your machine needles in here. Gosh, there's so many different things that you can store. I mean, we love a storage tub. We don't we? We love it. So you can see I'm just following the line. I don't think it looks too bad. But just remember, when you do quilt, which way up. You're either going to have your quilting on the uppermost, so the base is here, or you're going to have it so the base is here. And actually on the big one I did it so the base was on this bottom part here, but I quite like it. I wanted to see the difference between the two, to be honest, and then I can show you guys how it looks. So this makes it much more interesting than using just one strip of fabric. You know, you're practicing your patchwork. I mean, let's not call it patchwork. If patchwork is not your thing, if it's something that you're totally not interested in, and I do get that, then don't call it patchwork, call it piecing. You kind of sort of cheat yourself, really. Trick yourself to thinking it's something else. And yeah, I'm sure you can cope with piecing two pieces of fabric together. And there we are, we're on the home stretch now. So it doesn't take long. I think that needed one more stitch. No, we're all right. There we go. So So if I was to show you what that looks like, there you go. That's how it looks like. That's how it looks like. That's what it looks like. So there. If I hold it still, you can see. And if you think, oh, that's a bit tugged there, you know, it's only your wadding. So I would just pull that. It's only your wadding that might be a little tight under here. So your wadding is just fibrous. That will stretch all out of place anyway if you're not careful. So we'll do this. So this is the top, and this is the base. Yeah, but you might find you want to turn it around and have this as your base, where the stitching is closest to the base, and that being your top. Please yourself. Or you can do a second row stitching, and then it doesn't matter at all. So I'll just change my thread back to my regular thread, and I'll get back to you shortly. So I have joined my whole strip together on the short end. There we go. So I've got a tube, if you like, little stand-up bit there. So like I say, decide where you want that quilting, top or bottom. I definitely want it to go towards the top. I think that would look really nice. So now what we have to do is join the base. And the base is cut in one big piece. We've got wadding on the back. I haven't done any quilting. You could if you wanted to. And then it's just a case of pinning now, or using your clips. Now what I do suggest you do is to find your centre and quarter marks on your base. Mark it with a pin, you know, pop a pin in there. Let me do this so you can see. You know, these pins are going to be moved in a sec, but we'll just mark it like this. You could use a chalk pen if you wanted to, or heat erasable. It depends on the colour of your fabrics. Bring your pins up and then mark that quarter bit. And this is just to make sure that you ease the fabric in correctly, so you're not left with a piece that's too short on here, or whichever which way, or too big. You want it all to kind of match up, really, ideally. So there's your quarter marks. So now we want to do the same with this, and so not forgetting that we want our quilting going upwards, so we put our pins in the base here. So I'm just going to mark, that's easy because that's where my joining seam was there. Okay. So just fold that in half and get that seam there. Now be careful of these seams. That reminds me to tell you, because don't forget, well, I didn't do any back stitching on any of these seams, so they are kind of open stitching there, and if you're not careful they will come undone. So just be careful, either back stitch on these seams to hold them nice and securely, or just be careful. You could run a stay stitch all the way around, a basting stitch, just to secure those ends, and then all you're going to do is fold that in half, get those two pins to meet, and then pop a pin in on the quarter marks, so it's half of that square there. Okay, so now we've got our quarters marked. Don't forget, this is the base, so now our quilting lines are towards the top, this being our base. So now what we're going to do is join the two together. And I like to stitch the straight edge onto the base. I don't like to stitch with the base facing me. I just find that a lot easier. So now we're going to line up our pins. So obviously one of these can come out. I'll bring that in so I can show you. So your right sides together. So now if we go across to the other side, we'll get these two pieces stitched in, or sorry, pinned in first. Lose one and pin. And then we'll do the quarters. I mean, you could just go straight for it, why not? If you're feeling brave. But you could just take 5 minutes to do this. It just makes it easier for you, really. I think if you weren't watching, I'd just bung it in and ease it in as I go. But it's just that you just run the risk of it not fitting. So you can see that that's quite good. It's fitting quite nicely. So now what you can do is just bring in perhaps the quarter of the quarter, half of the quarter. Would it be the 1/8 marks? I suppose it would be, if we think about it sensibly. Do it by the clock. Actually, you'd have to have 2. Yeah, okay. I'm waffling. I'll shut up now. So you can see what we're doing. Now, even though I said I'm going to be stitching on this side, on the straight edge, I'm pinning my base only because I can kind of see the base better this way, and it doesn't really matter that the pins are going to be on the wrong side. As long as you stick the pin heads out, if you make sure that your pin heads are sticking out, just makes it super easy. So there we are. So that's all pinned. So now obviously all you're going to do is stitch it on your machine. Now, like I say, I'm going to start stitching. I might as well start stitching at the seam here, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to stitch on the top, take the pins out as I go, and if we've only got that little section to fit the base into the side, and that's really easy to do. So just see how you go with that. Don't forget, because we've put wadding on here, and especially if you've used like an H640, like an iron-on stabilizer of any sort, you lose your bias on the circle, so you've got no flexibility on this whatsoever. If you've used just regular wadding like I have, obviously you've still got that little bit of that bias, really, because the wadding, as I said before, will just stretch any way you want it to. So don't forget to turn your your stitch length down to 2.5 again, your standard length. And if you're not sure what that is, just switch your machine off, switch it back on again, and it'll set to your regular stitch. The only thing I would always say to you when you're stitching straight edges onto circles is to make sure that your raw edges are absolutely sitting on top of each other, totally parallel, because if your straight edge deviates, if it doesn't go round the curve, you'll actually lose your measurements will be wrong, basically, especially if you deviate on the circle, I have to say. So try and keep that all correct. But the whole thing is worked out, so it is absolutely 100% accurate. I rediscovered the joy of Pythagoras. Don't even ask. Don't even ask. As you know, I'm not a number person. I struggle really hard with numbers. Okay, so I've run out of bobbin. I'll be back to you in a minute. And so we continue all the way around. That wasn't meant to be a pun. So like I said, just make sure that your raw edges sit absolutely on top of each other. You could of course trim the strip, you can what we call square it up, but you know what that means, just trimming off the edges so it's lovely and neat. That will help. But as everything is measured really well, if this is a struggle for you, I want you to check your seam allowances, because obviously we've put 14 little strips together, so you've got plus the end seam, so 15 seams that, if they're not accurate, could put the whole thing out. And even if it's only a centimetre, you've got another centimetre to try and get onto the base of your storage container. So it does make a difference. So I just want you to check that. And there's all sorts of tips and tricks you can use. I have a little bit of tape. I have a 1/4 inch guide. It's not accurate enough for me to, I prefer it just slightly in, so I suppose I'm stitching a scant 1/4 inch all the time, but that actually works better for me. And my 1/4 inch foot on this machine also, I'm using it, I don't put the edge necessarily on the edge of my fabric, I just come in a wee bit. I think that makes a huge difference. So there we are. So there is our main body done. And if you want to at this stage, give it a press. But over time it'll sit nicely. It doesn't need snipping into either. Sometimes you snip a curved edge. This doesn't need it. Just push out that seam. Obviously you could finger press it. could get the heat of your iron in there as well. I mean, we're going to do that at the end just to make sure it all sits nicely. So there is our outer there already done. So now we need to do the lining. So pretty much repeat. So we've got our strip of fabric. This time we have a 1 1/4 inch strip of wadding all the way along the top. So this is your top edge with the wadding, okay? Now, funnily enough, you might see this slightly discoloured. Yes, you can see it, which is good, because when I was preparing to shoot this video for you, I was spraying my wadding strip, not thinking, but I was spraying my fabric. It's only a temporary adhesive, but even so, it's very, very sticky. So to take that stickiness away, and this is a good tip, I put some baby powder or any other powder onto the fabric. Obviously this is on the inside, so it's not going to come through unless you're using black. Be careful. But it takes all that stickiness away, because I thought as soon as I start to stitch it, it's going to get itself into a panic because it's got glue on it. It wasn't much, but enough to worry. So right sides together. So it's a good little tip. We used to use that tip when we were cutting using dies to cut through lots and lots of layers of fabric, where we had used Bondo web, and the die cutting machine would work far more effective if we took the paper off the back of the Bondo web, or heat and bond, whatever you're using. Well, of course, if you fold your fabric onto each other with that, it will totally stick together. Even though it's not heated, it just bonds, and we couldn't peel it off. So consequently, baby powder on the Bondo web worked a treat, and also it didn't stop the adhesive from working, which is even better. So little tip there for you. Wonderful world of TV. So there's my base. It's folded in half. I cut it obviously on the fold. So all I'm going to do now is pop a pin in where the fold is, and once again I shall put my pins to the outside. I'm using my Taylor Seville pins. Please, if you're in the market for pins, these have to be, they've just got to be the best on the market. They are superb. So pin either side, and then obviously what we're going to do is fold that over, get those two pins to meet, and pop a pin in on the quarter marks again. So it's just a repeat of what we've already just done. And I would just do a crease and then open it up. My centre point here on my desk is so far away from my arms, I can't do this easily. So there we are. That's beautiful fabric, isn't it? Really gorgeous. And there is a kind of right and wrong to it. I think that's possibly the right side, so I'll keep it like that. And then with this one, well, we've got powder on it now, so that is definitely the inside. This is the right side. It's quite different actually. So again, I don't need to mark that seam line there because I know where it is. Now you might think, oh, she hasn't left a turning gap. That's deliberate. I will unpick that seam there. Don't think that I'd forgotten. I just find it sits nicely if I keep that seam intact. Do my half points and then bring those two pieces together. Put my pin in. Don't forget, you can see I'm putting my pin heads to the outside. Okay, now because our fabric is wider here, it means that when we come to put the lining into the storage tub, that's what gives us our faux binding, and because we've put a lovely piece of wadding on there, it remains nice and padded. So we're doing exactly the same again. Right sides to right side, so I'm going to try and remember which I said was the right side, which is that. So I'll bring that in for you. And like I said, I don't know why, but I always pin my circles on and then stitch on the straight. And that's for anything really. Bags, all sorts. Just always pin. I tell you what, so a good example, and that's Drunkard's Path. I'm trying to think what the name of the patchwork block is, but yeah, Drunkard's Path, where you've got the two curved pieces, convex, concave, and I use the concave as the straight edge. I know that sounds a bit weird, but it works. Find your 1/8 points. I mean, the thing is, this is not stabilised now, so be careful you don't stretch. You're going to be, if anything, you're stretching the circle, so just be careful you don't do that. You can fold your fabrics again so you find that optimum point, but I promise you, with all the mathematics that I've done, this will fit perfectly. It always looks that it doesn't, it's not going to, but it absolutely does. But just be careful when you're stitching that you don't stretch. And of course, by having the straight edge on the top, it's very unlikely that you're going to stretch the circle, which is obviously the bias. It's just how it works. So there we are. We've got our eight pins in there. You can see that they're sticking out on the outside. That's perfect. So let's bring the machine in and let's put it under. So we'll start at the seam. Now while you've got access, if you like, to that seam here, what you could do is get your iron and press that open. So when you come to do your turning gap and you open that up, you've got a lovely creased edges. Obviously I haven't done that, but that's what you could do. Just another little top tip. Full of top tips today. So once again, just try and remember to put your raw edges to your raw edges. So your circle underneath, even though we're putting a straight to a fold, a straight to a circle and a curve. Oh dear. It will fit as long as you keep your seams, your edges on top of each other. And because our little sections are quite small, really, it's quite easy to just sort of keep fiddling with it and making sure it's sitting straight. If you want more pins, fine, but please don't stitch over them. You've heard my story of stitching over pins, I'm sure. We don't want that. So again, be careful you don't stretch your circle. Keep to a 1/4 inch seam allowance as well. So that makes a huge difference. It really does. And this smells lovely. So just keep lining those edges up. A little bit at a time. No rush. So if anything, I'm letting that circle underneath just sit nicely on my machine, and I'm using the straight edge to line up. Just get rid of that pin there. Like I say, take your time. Last little bit there. And you can see fits beautifully. Let's just move that slightly. There we go. I'll hold it from the inside. See what that looks like. Easy peasy. So that's stitched that in all the way round, looking glorious. Let's turn it right side round so you can see. Lovely bit of stitching there. Of course, if you use a really short stitch, so maybe put it on 2, your curves will be better, even though it takes a little bit longer to stitch. So there is our lining. So at this stage I'm just going to open up my turning gap. So I'll just get my seam unripper in there. So we're leaving a turning gap of, well, 3 inches, let's say. See how we get on. Now, because I've opened up that gap after stitching, we haven't got a locking stitch top and bottom, so just be careful when you turn this thing through. So right sides together, and we're going to match up our seams. So we've got 1 seam obviously on each piece. There we go. It's really out of the way, so I'm just going to shift the whole thing. Come along. That's it. There we go. So our seams are now, and this is probably where you'd want to use clips rather than pins, because you've got more bulk now, because you've got 2 layers of fabric, 2 layers of wadding, you've got your seams, so you might want to use clips. The clips kind of lend itself to bulk, so just keep fiddling with that until it sits. Now you don't have to pin this because your measurements are all correct, so you don't really need to pin, but maybe for security, in other words, you want to be able to get round the whole thing without it puckering, then pin. That's better. Okay, last little bit. These are nice little makes, aren't they? I think you'll like these. So let's just stitch along that top there. Now it doesn't matter whether you stitch the lining piece or whether you stitch the inner, you know, your outer quilted piece. It doesn't really matter. Because I don't have a free on this machine, I'm going to stitch on the inside. So I'm going to turn it so it's that way round. Start at the seam, I'll be good. Start at the seam. Try and get those nested. I shouldn't worry too much though. You've got to remember what we're making here. Sometimes you've got to be good and behave and nest your seams, but you know, we're only making a storage bin. Beautiful spice. What would that be? Cardamom, is that spicy? Turmeric. Turmeric's very good for you. Turmeric is actually it's these colours, isn't it? Orangey, yellow, gold. So we're doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So just make your way around. Obviously, if you want to make this a little bit more robust, you could use a heavier stabiliser, like a Decaville, something like that. You could do a double layer of wadding, something like that. You could use H250, an iron-on medium weight stabiliser, and wadding. So stitched all the way around, just turn through. So lots of options, depends on how you want it to look. I give you the idea and the inspiration, hopefully. I'll let you do the hard bit of choosing how you want it to look, how you want it to be finished. Okay. So obviously we want to stitch our turning gap, and I will do that. I'm not renowned for it, but I will. Just pull that seam out. We're going to fold this, well, around about 1/2 inch. Yeah, I'm just looking because I've done that by eye, but let's say 1/2 inch. Let me just turn my, stitch my turning gap. I know, A lot of you will be laughing because you know me well enough. And actually when we did our La La Land this year, you know, our big meet-up in Birmingham, 200 ladies thereabouts, I actually sold some of my samples, and the majority of them, I did say to the ladies, you know, you've got to stitch the turning gap. Oh dear. Well, I'm in too much of a hurry. Move on, I've got things to do. There we are. So there's our turning gap closed. Just trim my edges. Now, pop your lining into your spice. Just get that thread. And it'll need a nice iron. It really will need a nice iron to get it to sit nicely. What I want you to try and do is to get the seam here where you've joined the two pieces together to stay upright, because we're going to stitch in the ditch. And you have to be quite accurate stitching the ditch, otherwise it's really obvious. You could change your thread back again to that beautiful, well, I've used like a denim yellow. When I say denim yellow, you know what I mean. It's like the stitching on your Levi's. Those are the days. Sit in the bath to shrink them. Oh, hey. So now you want to make sure that that turnover is about a ½ inch. Okay, about a ½ inch. It could be more if you want. In actual fact, if you make your lining a wee bit smaller, it does sit better. Now, again, I haven't got a free arm. Well, I have, and on other machines, but I favour this one, to be honest. So I'm going to stitch now on the top. I'm going to stitch here on the top. And I could turn my pod inside out to do that, but I'll stitch it on the top here. So you can see the fabric. And I'm going to stitch right near that seam line there. And I'll start where the seam is. I'm just trying to make sure my seam is sitting upright. Now I'm going to turn my stitch length up to 3, because this is a top stitch really. Gave a little jump on that seam there. So like I say, I perhaps measure. I'm not. But try and stitch just underneath that seam. Now you might want to press this so it's absolutely spot on. And like I say, you could use that contrast yellow and make it a statement. I'll leave that for you to decide. Depends on how much work you want to do on them, isn't it? Let's get that sitting nicely. That's it. Because it's got almost like a double layer of wadding now, you need to just kind of tell it who's boss here. And obviously a press would help. If you wanted to, you could draw a line, couldn't you, where that ½ inch point is on the lining part. That'll be a little bit out there, but I think we're okay. So, just trim my thread there, little end there, and that is our medium size storage container. There we go. It needs a press. obviously. And that will nest with the other two. Now, obviously, you perhaps don't want to nest it because I'm thinking you're going to put things in it, but they will nest. So if we get the little one, that sits in there. And if we get the big one, and mind my autumnal leaves, that sits in there. There we go. So you've got your nest of 3. So maybe as a gift, give them a good press. Gorgeous. And you can see the quilting on that big one is on the lower half, not the upper half. So there's our little one there. And they all stand at, I think it was 7 inches. Let me measure. I do say in the pattern. Yeah, 7 inches. So a nice size. So baby bear, mummy bear, daddy bear. You can see that's quite big, isn't it? Quite useful actually. Put all your machine embroidery threads in there. Make sure they're all secure at the ends, otherwise they'll get into a right bird's nest. But there is our pattern called Spice. Because like any spice, you're going to have them lined up in a row and look absolutely gorgeous wherever you decide for them to go. It could be in your bedroom, in your kitchen, in your bathroom, in your sewing room, obviously. I could take these away in the motorhome with me and they can all store together until I'm ready to use them. Maybe I'm going to use this one for all my bread rolls. Maybe this one I'm going to put a great big cake in. That sounds good. And maybe this one, maybe I'll fill that with maybe crisps or biscuits. I think that sounds nice. Okay, so there's Spice. I hope you enjoy making it. Don't know if it's a her or a him. And I hope to see loads.